Well, good evening. Let me just check I've got some sound coming through. I think I have. Just adjust my microphone, get that out of the way, but not too far away. Good stuff. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, as always, for joining us, not least on a Monday evening at the start of July. I'm sure there are many options you have for how you can spend your time, so we really appreciate that you choose to spend it with us. We've got a session here that I think you're going to find interesting. We are going to talk in quite a lot of detail about some quite specific suggestions for how maybe improvements in GCSE courses could be made. And I'm going to release this evening a resource that we're really, really proud of here. We released it at 4 o'clock when we did the first webinar today, and got some really, really good feedback. So I'm hoping that likewise it's going to be useful for you guys too. So really looking forward to getting that out to you and seeing what you guys make of it. So that's going to be sort of in 10-15 minutes time that I'll share that with you. But it's a really, really interesting document resource that we would like you guys to have a look at and to consider. Marta's on the chat and she's going to be sharing some links with us from home.
Hello.
This evening. Marta, you all right?
Yeah, I'm all right, thank you.
Good, good. Any more games of Pass the Pigs since I've left?
No.
I was struggling in those games tonight, but yeah, we'll have another game later. So without further ado, let's see if we can make a start. Okay, so my first job with you guys this evening is just a couple of reminders. If you have taken part in our previous session, or I guess sort of GCSE session 1, I suppose you would call it, we kind of dwelled on a couple of points that we felt were really, really important. So just reminders of those before we go further into this evening session. First things first, we have looked in detail at the process and the importance of practice. And we've stressed that ideally in your GCSE course, you'll get something close to the notion of daily, weekly, and monthly practice and review. Exactly how that maps to your school, of course, is difficult. Can we realistically do daily review with students? Maybe not. But can we get something close to it so that that Ebbinghaus forgetting curve is actually managed and minimized? That's a really, really, really central, important point to what we've done through the entirety of this summer webinar series. Secondly, we made the point about interleave, and it very much relates to the first point. And if nothing else, even if we don't interleave any new content, which of course we can, and I'll make that point in a second, we do want to encourage people to interleave old and new learning. And of course, that old and new learning very much fits into this notion of the review cycle as well, and particularly those weekly summary and those weekly and monthly reviews that I think are really important. Thirdly, we said make instruction, let's take it teaching, delivery, lecturing, use whatever term you want to use. Let's make that instruction repeatable and reviewable. We are becoming clearer and clearer and clearer that one of the features of a strong and productive educational experience of a course offer is the ability to review things when those things may have been forgotten or with a tendency for things to be forgotten. Now, my point is that should include the instruction, the teaching, the delivery, the lecturing. Again, use whichever terminology you want to use for that. And finally, as a reminder, we argued that this notion of blocked teaching, remember block teaching would be the idea of, you have the students study, practice, and maybe test on whatever A is, and then you repeat that process for B, and then you repeat that process for C. Okay, and the idea is that each of these is like a discrete block that doesn't have enough association with other parts of the course and what needs to be learned. And what we're arguing basically in replacing or reconsidering block teaching is the idea that potentially we can interleave teaching so that students get exposure to new ideas in the context of other exposure to other new ideas. Don't think I'm choosing the same blues and oranges here, but nevertheless. Okay, so that was one of the points that we've stressed that we think could be really important for developing contextual understanding of the learning that needs to be done. So those are 4 things that we would really like to encourage you to consider, to potentially implement in your course structures. Of course, it's your call and your decision. They're your students, that's your school, it's your classroom, of course. But these are the things that we are promoting and suggesting to you as possibilities and things that should make a difference. Now, what therefore is today about? Today is about the idea of promoting skills-based learning. And it sounds a bit fancy, it sounds a bit woolly, but let me be really, really clear with what I mean by skills-based, okay? The skills that we need to be developing, or what we might say, what is needed, or what are these skills that are needed? I mean, they're really simple to identify. In almost all cases, in almost all GCSE courses, there is one slight exception on one particular course that probably none of you are doing anyway. But we want the skills to be knowledge and understanding. No, there's nothing going to be surprising about that. Effectively AO1, knowledge and understanding. We want to be developing skills in the areas of, or in the area of application for almost all of you, AO2. And we want to be developing the skill of evaluation and analysis. And a question I would ask at this point, before we go deeper into this conversation, is if we were to ask a question which was, right, of those three skills, of those three things that need to be developed with our students, if we were to walk into the average class in our department, in our entire PE sector, what would we tend to see for the development and the delivery of these particular skills? Okay, how would we see across PE departments today, how is evaluation and analysis being improved? How is application being improved? How is knowledge and understanding being improved? What are the dominant structures which are causing those skills to be developed? And my point tonight is, can we reflect and find a range of structures and experiences which promote them better? And that's what I'm going to try and establish with you this afternoon. But what I would say, as kind of like a summary point to that, my assertion to you is that our classrooms need to represent these skills in as much quality and frequency as possible. So therefore, I come back to that point. How are we as a sector, how are we as an industry developing this right now? How is that being done, and can we improve on it? And to that end, I'm asking three questions off the back of this. And here are those three questions. The first one is probably the most challenging one to answer. And honestly, I'm almost going to abandon trying to answer the first question. I have such a strong fundamental view of this that it might even be unpalatable to some of you, because I have a very strong view of what the answer to question one should be. But the question is this one: do we separate those AO1s, AO2s, and AO3s? Is that how we should be doing it? I think there is some guidance out there, particularly from some of the examples, that we should be separating those skills and sort of developing them as sort of discrete experiences. I literally have no idea how you do that. It would be alien to my experience in my classroom environment, but some people argue that that's the way you should do it. So I'm going to just pose that as a question for you to consider. What I would say, and of course I introduced it for those of you that were with us in kind of the session one, is that we've got an idea that this here is AO1. Okay, so this here is AO1, knowledge and understanding. My point at the very least would be, when we are developing in AO1 only, let's say we're studying some definitions, we're learning some points, we're learning some characteristics, they should be leading us into the behaviors of evaluation and analysis and application. To try and do those in isolation, I find to be really, really challenging a concept. But some people seem to be suggesting we do it that way. So look, who am I to say that that's wrong? I certainly wouldn't be comfortable for me, but perhaps some people feel that that's the right way for them. Okay, maybe. But the second question is fascinating. How do we free up time for skills-based learning? Let's take this here, AO3ness. Let's take this here, AO2ness. Let's take application. Let's take evaluation. Let's take the tendency to analyze, to break things down and explain them. How are we actually finding time to do that? And are we finding that the majority of time is actually being consumed up here in knowledge and understanding? If it is, how can we manage that? And look, I'd actually like to have a little go at trying to answer that question. Okay, how are we going to free up this time? So just on a very practical level, I think people broadly have got three options. Okay, option one should not be a consideration. It should be the one that you hopefully reject straight away. Option one is to somehow in your mind invent more time, or to work double hard, or whatever it happens to be, or to do nothing and hope it all goes well. Look, I hope you guys reject that one outright, because obviously it's not going to have the impact that we want. Whilst it might not be customary to quote the Wu-Tang Clan in these scenarios, that lyric from when the RZA sang, "The world won't get no better if you just let it be," that actually is quite a nice way to think about this. And this, I hope you can disregard. But I do wonder how many of us are just doing that, just making that assumption. It's just how it is. It'll just have to be that way. That's the only thing we can do. Option 2, in my opinion, to find that time, remember, option 2 is to spend less time, to spend more lesson time on AO2 and AO3 and to spend more homework time on AO1. And what we mean by that is effectively taking that sort of dominant experience of learning the content and taking that a little bit outside of the classroom so that the classroom is not so dependent on that. And the classic way to do that, well, I say classic, I mean, it's funny really how this all sort of almost feels kind of a little bit traditional by now. But you've got this notion of flipped learning, okay? So this is one model that you could potentially apply if you wanted to get more skill-based stuff in the classroom and get the content and understanding, the knowledge and understanding dealt with before. So what we mean by that is that students preload knowledge before they come to the class to use that knowledge. So as an example, so just a couple of specific examples about this. This is where students would take things out of the classroom, like tutorials. They would do things like some practice mode quizzing. They would do perhaps some test mode quizzing before, what's happening to my handwriting? They would do these things before they come into the class. And then the classroom is all about that skill, application, usage of that knowledge which has been developed. So again, just to be clear on this, in the classroom then, the classroom is focused on application. The classroom is focused on, let's just loosely call it E&A, evaluation and analysis. The classroom is focused on graphical work where that, or data work, where that is appropriate and relevant. It's focused on, really important, the skill of writing. We shouldn't undervalue the fact that almost every mark in, very close to every mark in GCSE PE theory is achieved through the conduit of writing. Therefore, the classroom should be a writing place very, very, very commonly, okay? Very commonly. And finally, who knows, we might even be able to, let's put it in inverted commas, or let's consider about the idea of experimenting, bringing things to life, making things practical, actually doing what this theory happens to be. Whether that's, heart rate responses practicals or achieving a spirometry trace or whatever it happens to be, bringing that theory actually to life. And of course, as we've said already, the practice and review, we've said already, it will be daily to some degree. It will be weekly to some degree, applied to your own situation, of course. It will be monthly to some degree. Okay, so we are establishing this idea of preloading knowledge, using it in the classroom, reviewing it. Okay, so that is one option. Now, the final point about time is this notion of option 3. Okay, make lesson and homework tasks interchangeable. The idea that the classroom is and can be absolutely anywhere. Every resource, every task, every moment of instruction, everything is available at every point of a learner's cycle. And of course, this is loosely speaking what we'd call blended learning. Now, I'm not going to go into any great detail on that tonight, but that is how I run classrooms myself. That is the only model of classroom that I would even consider applying to something like a GCSE PE course. Now, my journey was my personal journey has been very much like that. I've got to be absolutely honest. There's been times in my teaching previously where I did accept that model. It's like, oh, come on, it's just how it is. It has to be that way, and therefore, that's just how it is. And I'll just have to put up with it and accept what it produces. But by changing that, by moving to more of a flip model, by moving ultimately to a blended learning model, that's where I found the massive gains and massive improvements. Now, that sets the context for the final question before we really get into what I want to reveal this evening. And it's this question here, question 3. How do we actually develop knowledge and understanding, application and evaluation and/or analysis? I mean, it's a good question, right? Literally, how do we do that? What are the experiences, behaviors, protocols, processes? If we were to go into the best classroom right now for developing, I don't know, evaluation, what would be happening in that classroom? What would they be doing? What would be the expectations? What would be the behaviors? How would they structure writing? How would they do those things? And I've had a bit of a go, and it's ultimately what I want to release with you this evening, at trying to answer that question. So a lot of the rest of this session is specifically focused on this, okay? It's specifically focused on this. Okay, so with that in mind, I'll just pause there a second. March, I want to sip my water. Is there anything you want me to clarify? Is there anything you want me to answer at this point?
No, we haven't got any questions. Nobody's there are no questions coming in yet. I would like to encourage everyone to anything that's not clear, anything that you would like more information on, any questions you have or any comments you want to make. You might agree, you might disagree. Please do get in touch. We've got the chat facility, so please click on chat and send us a message, or also through the Q&A facility just at the bottom of your screen. You can get in touch with us as well.
Okay, good stuff. Thanks, Marta. Now, guys, what I want to introduce to you at this point, and it's just going to take a little while just for me to show this to you, to demonstrate this to you, but I've literally tried to have a go at answering that question. What do we need to do to develop knowledge and understanding, to develop application, and to develop evaluation and analysis? Okay, so I've tried to produce a resource that I think answers that question as best as I humanly can answer it. And also I've tried to make it in a way that is also dynamic and leads to further insight, further learning and further example, okay? So let me show it to you now. So when you first see this, and Marta, could you please post a link into the chat so people can actually download their version of this and be looking at it on their own machines as they're as we're going, there you go, you put it up already for me, thank you. So we're looking at this resource here. Now, obviously, I haven't got anyone remotely zoomed in here, and you're probably thinking, what the hell is that? It doesn't look like much. Just to be clear what I've done here, I have put into our rows the 3 AOs, okay, the 3 assessment objectives. AO1, knowledge and understanding, AO2, application, AO3, evaluate and analyze. And at the top, if I now sort of zoom in a little bit, I have got a cycle of 3 different experiences. I've got the cycle of learn it, I've got the cycle of practice it, and I've got the cycle of review it. And what I've attempted to do is to detail in the best quality I can the processes that I think relate to learning it with regard to knowledge and understanding, practicing it with regard to knowledge and understanding, reviewing it with regard to knowledge and understanding, and then exactly the same for application. Learn it, practice it, review it. Exactly the same for evaluate and analyze. Learn it, practice it, review it. Now, I think the suggestions on here will directly influence the potential for classes, for cohorts, and for individual students to perform better in these 3 specific skills in this qualification experience I've got here. So let me just go through a couple of examples. I mean, obviously you can browse this at your own leisure, but a couple of specific examples that I kind of want to address here as considerations. Let's just take knowledge and understanding, learn it. I am suggesting, and it's a theme we've looked at already, that we provide highest quality, repeatable teaching to all students. Why? Because they can learn it, whether they learn it from their teacher or from a different environment, and they can repeat and review it in the future. One of the things that we have to address as an industry of teachers is whether the notion of teaching of being available as a one-off deal is too exclusive for our classroom environments, given the way human beings actually learn, and more importantly, how human beings forget. Okay, so we've got highest quality instruction, repeatable teaching, possibly flipped and blended. We've got the idea of seat time, variable seat time exposure to teaching. And we've got the idea of allowing students to review teaching, all of the point I've just made. We've also stressed here that teaching for knowledge and understanding has to be meaningful. Again, if we look at that Ebbinghaus work, one of the key points that comes from it is the more meaningful learning is, the greater the tendency to remember and the lesser the tendency to forget. So interleave instruction to develop wider understanding, replace block teaching where possible, and apply it to health and performance improvement. Okay, well, you could say health improvement and performance improvement. There are a couple of things outside of that, such as some sociocultural factors, but that is what we want our knowledge and understanding, in my opinion, that's what we want our knowledge and understanding delivery to look like. Let's look at practice it. Encode, build stakes gradually, and set high targets. If we can practice our knowledge and understanding in that framework, our students stand a better chance. And then we've got our review it, personalized and big picture. Now, I want to draw a couple of key features out of this that I think are really important for people to reflect on. I have done this for knowledge and understanding, which is in many ways kind of the easy bit, but I've also done this for application. So a couple of examples. Let's go back to the learn it, or you could, I guess, look at the teach it aspect of this. Teach within examples. What do we mean by that? Well, I guess in a very simplistic way, that's the difference between saying the following are the short-term responses of exercise. That's teaching outside of examples. It's just teaching theory. It's quite different to establish with a student. In the first 3 minutes of an Olympic triathlete's performance, some of these are going to be the physiological responses. That's quite a different moment of teaching to, here is a list of short-term responses to exercise. We're being specific. We're talking about athletes. We're talking about performance. It would lead very naturally to say, well, how could the athlete make that better? How could they manage that better? So no explanation without application. We want a range of examples through teaching. Quite provocative, this next point. I'm arguing here for a diversity of application in teaching. Here's things that I personally do in my own teaching. I use 51% female examples in my teaching. Now, you might think that that is to some degree sexist or reverse sexist or something. It isn't. 50-50 does not exist, because if you use 10 images and 5 of them are men and 5 of them are women, you're going to have to use one more at some point, and it's going to make an 11th or a 13th or a 17th. At some point, you can't have it as 50-50. So my point is, generally, try and use more female examples. This one, though, 70% non-games examples that we use in our teaching. I think it's fair to say that all of us have had that experience of saying, well, you know, my students can kind of relate it to a footballer, but ask them about a pole vault or a table tennis player and they haven't got a clue. Okay, well, okay, table tennis player is a games player. You take my point. I'm saying here a diversity of application within our teaching is absolutely critical, and is what we would see if we saw teachers encouraging the learning of this material with excellent application. And then if we just follow that down, just the learn it part on the evaluate and analyze, we're looking at framing teaching. Okay, and what we mean by that is skill-based instruction. Teach to uncover why, how, what's good, what's bad. And for me, that's more than here's my slide of strengths, here's my slide of weaknesses. No, from the start of our teaching, we have to be expressing this in the evaluative frame, and developing that understanding in our learners. So my point is this: I've broken these whole series of behaviors into learn it, practice it, review it, and I've broken those 3 into groups. So learn it, highest quality instruction, meaningful instruction. Practice it, encode it, build stakes gradually, and set high targets. Review it, personalize, and big picture. Okay, a couple again. Just as examples, you guys really need to have a look through this yourselves, of course. Just as an example, let's take this one, application. We're encouraging you to have a series of case studies that your students contribute to over time. Look here, we've got case studies. We've got a minimum of 6 diverse case studies that students potentially are collaboratively working on over time. Each of these links, if you're looking at this document electronically, is dynamic. So if I click on here, for example, it's actually going to take you to some case studies that we've produced that you're very, very welcome to use. Or I didn't actually mean to open that in a different, in the same tab. But, or for example, let's take something like, let's have a look. Let's take something along the lines of mastery of task. You might look at that. So to practice knowledge and understanding, you're looking for mastery of task. If you click on this, bang, I meant to open that in a new tab, it's going to come through to this webinar, which is a webinar by us on mastery learning. Okay, so that document, there's me pulling faces. So that document is a start point, a jumping off point for you to consider a whole series of experiences that A, you can apply to your classroom, B, you can learn from and make your own decisions based on those things. And maybe even C, you know, by engaging with us, if we continually reiterate this resource, you could potentially also contribute to what could be included in here. Now, one of the critical things that I want to stress to you guys is about these little white dots. Okay, you've got little white dots all over this. So let's take, for example, encoding, knowledge and understanding. We're encouraging some kind of daily, weekly, or monthly quizzing, again, which is relevant in your own model. This little white dot is there for you so that you in your center, you in your class, you in your team, whatever scenario you happen to be in, you can effectively rate or consider how you think you're doing right now within that particular suggestion. Okay, so you could just simply use a RAG system, a red, an amber, a green. You could score it out of 5. You could score it out of 10. You could tick and cross. I don't care how you do it, but the point I'm trying to stress here is these are suggestions of things that could achieve impact in your classroom in that GCSE PE. And I'm encouraging you as a team, hopefully, to consider some of these suggestions and just to note the ones that you're already doing really, really well and the ones that could potentially make an impact in the future. And can I sort of stress finally, if you have a look at this, if you look at knowledge and understanding and the appearance of TEL, the ever learner on there, it can have a massive impact on your capacity to actually roll these ideas out. If I just sort of squeeze out a little bit here, make this a little bit more distant, you can see that knowledge and understanding, AO1, TEL is going to do a massive amount of that work for you. Application, it's doing a massive amount in there as well, although there are things that are bespoke and specific to the classroom, such as your students working collaboratively. And then evaluate and analyze, again, massive amounts of offer there, but there's more to do in the classroom because you need to be using that and reviewing with them. Last thing from me before I sort of open this up for some questions, suggestions, and so on. Can I just stress in the review section the degree to which we have identified 2 critical points. The first one is live, precise performance indicators, diagnostic data that's produced for the teacher. Okay, if we are going to do things like I'm suggesting here, summer improvement plans between year 10 and 11, which is something I've done for, well, 2 decades now, albeit not always with GCSE students working in 6th forms for quite a long time. So between sort of somewhere between year 12 and 13 in those contexts. But one of the reasons I put this in here is because I always found during my time working in schools and 6th forms teaching PE, I always found that in term time, PE was not the priority for most students. You know, let's take, okay, I'm jumping away from the GCSE just for a second, but let's take an A-level student who might have been doing maths, chemistry, biology, and PE. PE was often the 4th most important in that particular relationship. So during term time, it would get the 4th most attention. Of course, there's exceptions and differences. I always found that by really maximizing the exposure and experience of students in that summer period, it was one of the times where I could move PE to top of the list. And I would say in year 10 and 11, and certainly my experience was as well in working in secondary school, was that again, it's one of those spaces which is available. And I'm not suggesting you slaughter kids during their summer holidays, but having some ongoing topping up, working on specific things. But to do that, we need that diagnostic data to achieve that. We need that data to tell us this student's strong here, this student's weak here, this student's weak here, and so on and so on and so on. So those are some suggestions for you. So we've released this document. It's for you. Please share it. Our plan is to reiterate this over time. We are going to try and refine it, improve it, probably over the course of the next 12, 18, 24 months to produce a perfect resource, a perfect document. And of course, you know, that's probably never going to actually exist, but we're going to try and iterate and reiterate this as we go. One last point before I come back onto the camera. Can I also stress the degree to which we have stressed the importance of one-to-one time with your students? Very functional here, for example, review writing together, specifically review application together. Again, how do we find time in our class to do more one-to-one small group work and less one-pace-fits-all work? If we want that to happen, we have to create a structure which causes it to happen. And that's why in that learn it part, I think that the tendency for us to teach from, let's say on average, PowerPoint, a few slides, here's my bullet points, write it down. I think that can be really minimized. And I think the teacher's time in the classroom can be maximized around some of these other behaviors, okay? So I'm gonna sort of put the brakes on there and jump back on here. Marta, is there anything you want me to clarify or anything you want me to answer?
No, well, I would just, I just would like you to I don't know, if you could talk me through, if I want to apply these principles to my department, what would you think would be the easiest or the most straightforward way of doing that? What would be the first thing, the very first thing I would need to bear in mind, and to apply? What do you think?
Okay, so I would say if you're looking to apply that entire model, the key to the lock is effectively a service like ours on the everlearner.com. It's really hard to achieve that model and still be delivering everything within the classroom and not having some of that support and scaffolding that you can get as a teacher through services like ours. So I think if you're applying the entire model, then the everlearner is absolutely critical to that process. However, I would also say that some of those things can just be implemented from a very, very, very basic level. Let's take the difference between just teaching for AO1 and framing your teaching within a range of examples in the way that I've suggested within that document. That's almost a switch. That's a mentality. That's a decision. That's a policy. That's something you're going to implement because it's the right thing to do. I'll give you another example of that. We've got things like, let's have a look at the practice of evaluation and analysis skills down here. This point here is really interesting, this one. Develop evaluative behaviors before evaluative writing. So just think about that a second. Develop evaluative behaviors before developing evaluative writing. And here we've got this idea of particular structures that you could use to achieve that: agreement circles, folded lines. And again, this is dynamic, guys. So if you want to go and, if you've never heard of, you've got no idea what folded lines is, for example, or agreement circles. I'll actually see if I can find agreement circles on this particular. Here's a lesson. Oh, that's inner and outer circles. It's going to be on here somewhere, but I'll probably. So that one there's folded lines. Okay, so this one here is folded lines, I think. So you can go to this tutorial, you can go to this guide. Here's agreement circles, for example. You can go to this and it's effectively going to explain to you how you'd structure that within that classroom environment. So for me, you can take individual elements of this and you can then look to implement those individual pieces. I'd also stress to you the fact that that document is also kind of raggable, rateable, it's auditable, I suppose. The fact that you can do that, it makes it a very, very useful tool when it comes to something like departmental review and development plan writing. I think it's quite a common experience, which is like, right, okay, something's not perfect, something's not going quite right, our results at this band are not where we want it to be, or whatever it happens to be. And it's like, well, how do we actually influence and implement something which is going to genuinely change that? I wrote that document thinking, right, okay, people in development plan writing mode could really use that document to try and get some stimulation and provocation for some of the things that they need or want to improve on. So I think from that perspective, but again, if you want to implement that whole picture, look, bluntly, you have to find time. And at the moment, the majority of time being used up in the majority of classrooms is through instruction delivery. Here is my teaching. Here is my presentation. So you've got to find an alternative for that, because without it, you haven't got the time to implement a lot of what's being described here. If you're just looking to implement small chunks of it, then you've just got to be selective. And I'd also say, guys, this is not about sort of throwing everything out and starting again. Be selective here, implement parts of it, read through that document. That, I would argue, is optimistic, even idealistic. So take chunks of it and look to apply them, put them into your teaching, take them out again, have a look. How did they work out? Almost in your classroom, it can become a multi-iteration model. You just keep reiterating over time. You play with it, experiments, you put things in, you have a look at them, what impact do they have, and you extract again. Those are good principles to have in any kind of quality improvement process. But again, just to reiterate what I said, Marta, if you want to implement the model that I've got on that screen, you have to use a service like ours. And look, guys, I'm really sorry that the world is a capitalistic one and that money is a thing and that we live in a fractional reserve banking system. It's not my fault. I can't do anything about it. We as a business, we try and be as fair as humanly possible to provide our services as good quality possible, as transparently as possible, and we reinvest everything that we earn. So if you, as it were, get in bed with us in some of the things that we're suggesting here, you can be very confident that that is being used wisely and it's going to have a long-term implication. What I did want to say about sort of website stuff, guys, is if you have no knowledge of what the Everlearn is, you need to have a look at it, guys. You really do, okay? So I'm logged in as a student here, Draco Malfoy. If I, for example, if I click on GCSE, if I click on what should we do? Let's do iGCSE for argument. No, let's do AQA. So these are the AQA GCSE courses that Draco is enrolled for. You see here, he's got some biology, he's got some chemistry, he's got some French, and here's his GCSE PE course, okay? So if he goes into here, Draco has access to this qualification, and he has access to ongoing learning, tutorials, practice mode, test mode, checkpoint mode, and he can experience this whenever he needs to, and also when his teacher tells him to via our assignments. Okay, so your students can come into here. I don't know. Let's choose something random. They can do. Let's do cardiac cycle for argument's sake. Let me take my headphones off. Your students can come in here, and they can effectively take this. Imagine this art pictured inside some to various parts of the book to the high self. Now, a couple of it call it relaxing, but let's put the back. So if you think about it, blood, they have to be in a state of diaphragm. So the student can access that teaching as repeatably as is required by that student, and also be reminded that for you as teachers, you can assign everything within specific time windows and tasks to your students, and it does that job for you. Okay, so I would say, Marta, that's absolutely critical. Okay, people need to be able to, they need a tool like that. Yeah, and you're right, Marta, for booking a free domain. Guys, let me just repeat what I said, right? It's hard, isn't it? It's hard as a business, like, to do things where you give stuff for free and you give your time for free, not least these sessions, but of course you're hoping people are aware of your work. I hope what we do in these webinars are provocative enough and useful enough that, and the resources that we give out, you know, that one we've been at tonight is a good example. The practice and retrieval resource, likewise. I think they're good examples of things that the infographic that we give out and people can use freely. But of course, you know, we ultimately do have to sustain our business. So so there you go. That's that. Any other points, Marta?
No, there aren't really any other points. Everyone's being really quiet. I think everyone's just listening and probably looking at the amazing document you've produced. Because I mean, it is packed with stuff. It's you know, it's packed with resources, ideas, and I don't know. I think it's really good. But yeah, everyone is very quiet.
That document's something that I've wanted to write for a long time. It was interesting this afternoon because we had the first webinar show at 4 o'clock and we literally finished that document at 1 minute to 4. So it was very touch and go for us actually getting it out today. And it's one of those things that you can constantly make better, or you can constantly refine. But use it, dip into it, click off it, go and nick our. Go and use our case studies, use those over time, have your students writing towards those case studies, go and take our webinar series, our training online, our CPD sessions that relate to these specific principles, use our platform, use our website, use the suggestions we've got of teaching, use those policies, you know, controversial, 51% female application, 70% non-games application, forcing diversity into our teaching that way. In the encoding, quizzing, practice mode, test mode, checkpoint mode, etc., etc., etc. Get those principles into your classroom structures, and they should make an impact. Okay, so those things are super. So I am going to insist, guys. You guys have got to ask a question. I'm not signing off until some of you ask a question. We've got some great people in tonight. We've got Lee. We've got Simon Bradbury up in Reading. We've got Luke Neville. Come on, you guys have got to make a point, ask a question, or whatever. Otherwise, I have to go home all worried that everybody hated what I said. So you got to get stuck in, guys. Let us know. And while you guys are typing in, I'm just going to offer you 2 reminders. On Wednesday of this week, we're doing a webinar session on teaching biomechanics. It's kind of aimed at A-level teachers. It could be level 3 BTEC phonics or science, to be fair, but it'd be really good for GCSE PE teachers as well. I really like biomechanics, and I'm going to try and offer some really good guidance for that 45 minutes on teaching biomechanics. So do join us on that one, Martin, if you can post the link to sign up for those webinars. And on next Wednesday, and guys, if you have a look at the way this document is actually, where's it gone? The way this document is actually structured. You know, if you look at the design of this for a second and you kind of think, well, how do you actually make something like that? Mike, who does all of our graphic design work, is an ex-teacher actually, as well as being a graphic designer. He's going to do a session on resource building. And I think one of the things I'd say to you guys about resources, I mean, I've been a classroom teacher for nearly 20 years. And I honestly thought that the best resources we could make were in Microsoft packages or were in Google Docs and that sort of thing. They really aren't. So if you're interested in more elevate or better ways of making high quality resources, for whatever reason, you might be looking to sell better on tests or whatever, take that session with Mike, because he's going to do some really cool stuff in that session. And for us now, resource design is a completely different animal to what it was when I thought I was making good quality worksheets and things through Word or PowerPoint or whatever it happens to be. Okay, I saw a comment come in. It was from you, Marta. Link to sign up to the next webinar. So
yes.
So in that case, guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign off. We've got the biomechanics webinar on Wednesday. Marta, I will be home to you and the family in about 7 minutes, is my estimation. That's assuming the fumes of gas that I've got left in the car get me back in one piece. Lee, thanks for making a comment. I really appreciate you. Good guy, Lee. And I'll wish you all a happy Monday. They were good, weren't they? And yeah, have a great week. If you're the last few days at school, good for you. Enjoy it. If you've got 3 weeks left, stick in there. You're going to be fine. It is going to come to an end eventually. So keep going. The summer is nearly here. Biomechanics on Wednesday, resource design on Monday. Thanks for joining us, guys. Really appreciate it. Have a great one.